As we continue to our study in Exodus, I need to apologize. I'm not like a Charles Heston, Charles Heston from the Ten Commandments, with a great image of crossing the Red Sea and raising Moses' staff up. There's this wonderful image. It's just a wonderful story, just beyond imagination, isn't it? Almost. You can't even articulate and do it. There's another great movie, an animated one of the crossing the Red Sea. What's it? Prince of Egypt. It's called. It's a wonderful movie as well. And there's this wonderful scene when they cross the Red Sea that the animator in their imagination have a whale in the side of the sea. And I love that image. I always think of that image as they're crossing on the Red Sea, how amazed they must have been, just in awe. And I think that sometimes we lose that sense of awe with God and who He is and His protection that He promises us. This story has meant a lot to a lot of people. Yesterday I was with my father-in-law and mother-in-law as my nephew was preparing to go to study out west, and so this was going to be the last time to see him for a while. And so we had a family gathering, and I was telling my father-in-law, who is a preacher of course, that I was going to preach on this message on the Red Sea, parting the Red Sea. And he said, I want to tell you something. He said, when I was a young boy, my grandfather took me aside, and he said to me, he told me the whole story of the Red Sea. And he came to that verse when God said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Raise up your staff and go on. And he said to me, he said, Frank, he said, remember, just go on. Keep going. After all these years, he still remembers his grandfather saying that to him. Have you ever had your back up against the wall, powerless to confront powerful forces and people exerting their strength over you? Powerless to move ahead in life, stuck and trapped, deeply afraid of the future, nowhere to turn. Trapped by an impassable ocean of doubt in front of you and a vicious, vindictive army of oppression behind you. It is the nowhere to turn, the powerless moments of life, when we are at our weakest and most fearful, that the grace of God reaches into our hearts and we see God's protecting presence with us. Who made the sun rise today? Who keeps your heart beating? Who helped you here this morning? Who gave you a roof over your head? Who is always there with you, having His protective, saving presence, even if you can't see Him? This is the message of Exodus 14. My prayer for all of us is not only do we see the God who saved the Israelites from certain doom by parting the Red Sea, but we will see God in our own lives once again, with His protecting presence as greater than any enemy we will ever face. That's an image of the Red Sea, one of the possible places where they crossed. They're not sure, of course, the exact location. But that's just, I wanted that because sometimes we can so fantasize it and not realize, wow, that was a real danger they faced. We cry out to you, Lord, that you open our eyes to see you this day. Who else, where else can powerless people turn? Who has the power to save us from enemies too powerful for us? That's the challenge of faith, isn't it? Seeing God with you in even the darkest moments of your life. Seeing divine protection amid otherwise certain doom. I believe this text calls for us, kind of yearns for us to place ourselves in the story. I find myself much like the Israelite people questioning why God would lead us out of Egypt, only to end up being trapped in a desert wasteland. Why would God bring such hope to me that I am finally free from oppression, only to allow my oppressor to corner me and trap me with no way to save myself? Why would God promise me freedom, only to allow the oppressor to take my very life? You ever feel like your dreams have been so close to coming true, and suddenly feel like they're snatched before your very eyes? Look at how the verses 10 through 12 describe the people when they saw Pharaoh and his chariots marching towards them. The people were terrified and cried out to the Lord and complained to Moses. Verse 12, they said to Moses, "Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone so we can serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Really? Is it Moses' fault for their predicament? I mean, they were slaves in Egypt. They were undergoing genocide of their children. One commentator spoke of this well. Not even the death of Pharaoh's own firstborn causes Pharaoh to fear God permanently, and not even the protection of their own firstborn from death at the Passover causes the Israelites to trust God completely. How quickly we stop trusting in God's presence when difficulty arises. We need strong reminders that God is with us and will watch over us, or our own lack of faith in God will be stronger than our trust in God. Paul understood this human weakness in Corinthians when God said to him, "My strength is made perfect in your weakness." That is the very essence of what is happening in this passage. Who is in control? Is it Pharaoh? He seems to think he's in control again. Who is strong enough to help us in our utter weakness? Chapter 13, kind of a little background, verse 17 of the text speaks of God not leading the people through the shorter route, through Philistine territory. Why? He says, because God says, if the Israelites face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. God is purposeful of guiding them through the desert to seem like they are wandering, so that God can reveal his power to the people and trap Pharaoh in his own evil plan of trying to destroy the people. God is in control of that whole scene. God shares his plan with Moses even at the beginning of the chapter. And that's why God is frustrated with Moses. In verse 15, when Moses cries out to God for help. Verse 4 shares God's plan. "I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and all his army, and the Egyptians will once again know that I am the Lord." Even God was concerned about the Egyptians really knowing who the true God was. This wandering, then, is all part of God's plan to reveal himself to the Israelites and the Egyptians. This is important as we think of God's protecting presence in our lives. We never are safer than when we are following God's will in our lives. That is when we are the safest, when we are following God's will. God led them through the desert and was leading them to the edge of the Red Sea to show his power and protecting presence. There's a favorite proverb of mine that says the following: "A person can't scoop burning coals into their lap and not expect to get burned." In other words, if we are living outside of God's will for our lives, we shouldn't expect God to protect us. If we are constantly missing worship on a consistent basis, should we be surprised that we feel distant from God? Jesus himself said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there with them." Last Sunday, I was off. and my family, we were in Sarnia for the day. Zach was part of what many Canadian families are choosing to do on Sunday mornings nowadays, playing sports. He had a baseball game that we only went to because I was off on the usual day on a Sunday morning. And he never usually plays on Sunday mornings because we're usually here at church. Well, the plan was for me to leave during the game and go to attend a local Presbyterian church there in Sarnia. Well, the game wasn't going well, so I wasn't too sad to leave and attend worship. The umpire had a horrible strike zone, and our players were playing horribly. So, of course, I was going grumpy. As I gathered in worship with fellow Christians, I realized what a gift God was giving me that morning. The message was average. The singing was okay. And many of the worshipers were much older than I was. And I looked upon the members of my family in surprise as a younger family was actually worshiping with them. But what I got out of worship was that I was a part of something bigger, God's bigger plan, of people from all over the world coming to know God and His power to save. I came in all frustrated with how the baseball game was going, and I left with the sense that God is with me. And God, just as God was with those people. It made my problems that seemed to occupy my mind seem so tiny compared to the strength of God to work in all times, all situations, and from generation to generation. If I could have you remember anything about this Sunday, if I could have you remember any verses from our text, it would be Moses' words in verses 13 and 14. Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the Lord's glory, as God's angel will come and bring you deliverance this day. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. My prayer is that we can see the Lord's glory as God's angel who has been traveling before you comes behind you to confront the enemies who dare harm a child of God. My prayer is that hands lifted in prayer over you will open your eyes to see God's protecting presence in your life, and that all who oppose you will flee in terror. My prayer is that your eyes will be open to see the impassable sea and all that it represents in keeping you from seeing God's powerful hand in your life, whether you are mourning lost loved ones, whether it is evil done to you or by you, whether you feel neglected by God and are chasing after false gods to fulfill you. All these will be washed away by God's power, collapsing the sea on all the enemies of God, trying to keep you from seeing His hand in your life. My prayer for all of us is that we can leave trusting that we don't have to be afraid, that God fights for us. There's a Christian poet who declares, "A sovereign protector I have, unseen yet forever at hand. Unchangeably faithful to save, almighty to rule and command. He smiles, and my comforts abound. His grace as the dew shall descend, and walls of salvation surround the soul He delights to defend." We're going to continue our tradition that we've been doing for Exodus of singing the spiritual and leading us into prayer to do that. Once again, this is, you should have hopefully gotten a copy of it as you came in, or at least share a copy. There was some copies handed out to you. Has everybody got a copy of it? It's an old, when Israel was in Egypt's land, And it's probably written around the time of American slaves, because Harriet Tubman speaks of singing this song, of how meaningful it was to her, the slaves, of just God's calling out, let my people go. And that's part of our heart, is to see our God that calls people to freedom. So you don't need to stand, but we're going to sing this, and then I will pray after we sing.